When I was 13 years old, my parents left me at a gas station off Highway 73, just past the exit for Wilton. The last thing my mom said before slamming the car door was, "Let's see him joke his way home." Then they drove off. It was early August, humid, sticky, and the sky was already dimming into that peach-orange color that always made me feel like summer was almost over. I remember standing there in my worn-out sneakers and cargo shorts, clutching a half-finished grape soda I'd bought with my own allowance, thinking it was another one of their tough love lessons. But this time, they didn't come back. My name's Jason, and I'm 33 now. I haven't seen or spoken to my parents in 20 years. Not since that night. And up until this morning, I thought they'd forgotten about me entirely. But when I woke up and checked my phone, 32 missed calls. All from numbers I didn't recognize. No voicemails, no texts, just this digital swarm of desperation. And I knew, somehow, instinctively, I knew it was them. But let me back up. Let me tell you what led to that night at the gas station, because it wasn't sudden. It wasn't just one bad day. It was years of something more corrosive, something quiet and persistent that eats at you from the inside out. The thing is, I was always the funny one. Not in a sitcom way, not in a class clown way. More like a coping mechanism. When things got tense at home, and they always did, I'd find a way to make people laugh. It started with silly impressions when I was little, then little jokes at the dinner table, then full-on comedic monologues at family gatherings. I got good at it fast, but in my house, laughter wasn't appreciated. It was tolerated, barely, until it wasn't. My dad, Grant, was a factory man. Blue collar, short fuse. He had a deep voice like gravel and always smelled like motor oil and sweat. He wasn't the worst man in the world, but he hated being laughed at. Even when it was obvious I was trying to lighten the mood, he'd narrow his eyes and mutter, "Life's not a joke, boy." My mom, Sheila, was more complicated. She smiled a lot, especially around other people, but it never reached her eyes. She played the victim in most situations, always hinting at how much she sacrificed for her family. But the truth was, she liked control, and nothing upset her more than when someone else had the spotlight. I think I started noticing the cracks when I was around 10. That's when my older brother, Mark, moved out. He was 19 at the time and already on his way to becoming some kind of golden child legend. He was serious, obedient, athletic. Got a scholarship to some college upstate. My parents bragged about him constantly, his grades, his discipline, his future. Meanwhile, I was the kid who turned in drawings of talking squirrels instead of science projects, who got in trouble for doing fake newscaster voices in class, who didn't know how to be normal, as my dad put it. At first, they just tried to fix me. My dad signed me up for baseball, thinking it would toughen me up. I hated it. The coach hated me too, mostly because I made the other kids laugh during practice. My mom started dragging me to church youth groups, hoping I'd absorb some sense of obedience from the other kids. I just ended up making friends with the one kid who quoted stand-up specials and did impressions of the pastor behind his back. When that didn't work, they moved on to mocking me. Quietly, at first, snide remarks at dinner, sarcastic praise when I actually did something right. Then louder, more public. One time, I got a standing ovation in my middle school talent show for doing a 5-minute routine pretending to be a stressed-out teacher dealing with chaotic students. I even did voices. Accents. I crushed it. When I got home that night, flushed with pride, my dad was sitting in his recliner with a beer in hand. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he said, "So now you think you're a star?" My mom just shook her head and muttered something about clowning around. Things only got worse from there. The more I leaned into comedy, the more they leaned out. They'd roll their eyes during my stories, cut me off mid-sentence, tell me to go perform for the Mirror. But the final straw, the one that led to that gas station, was a road trip. That cursed road trip. It was supposed to be a family bonding weekend. My mom's idea. She'd read some magazine article about getting away from screens and reconnecting as a family. So they packed up the old minivan and announced we were heading to a lakeside campground 3 hours north. I knew better than to get excited. But part of me, maybe the naive, still hopeful part, wondered if this time would be different. The car ride was long, hot, and silent. No music, no talking, just the dull drone of tires on asphalt. About halfway through, my dad missed an exit and started muttering under his breath. I couldn't help myself. I made a little joke. Something like, "Hey Dad, Maybe the GPS is trying to save us from your snoring tonight. It was dumb, harmless, but it set him off. He slammed the wheel and snapped. Shut it, Jason. Just shut your mouth for once. I looked at my mom for support. She just stared out the window like I wasn't even there. I tried again, softer this time. I was just joking, trying to lighten the mood. My mom turned then, slow and deliberate. You always are. Maybe if you spent less time joking and more time listening, people would take you seriously. It got quiet after that. Tense. My dad stopped for gas about 20 minutes later. We pulled into this little rundown station with flickering lights and a single bathroom that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. He told me to go stretch my legs, and I did. I wandered toward the convenience store, got a grape soda, and sat on the curb out front. I could still see the car. I wasn't more than 50 feet away. Then I heard the engine start. I turned, confused. My dad pulled the car into reverse, then drive. My mom looked straight at me, her face hard. Let's see him joke his way home. Then they drove off. At first, I thought it was a prank. A cruel one, sure, but something they'd come back from. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. The sky darkened. I called their names, walked around the lot, even asked the gas station attendant if he'd seen them. He hadn't. That night, I slept behind a dumpster, curled into myself, shaking from fear and the sudden weight of being completely, utterly alone. I didn't go back home after that. I couldn't. Something broke in me that night. Something about trust, about belonging. I made my way to the nearest town over the next few days, hitching rides and eating whatever I could find. Eventually, I ended up in a youth shelter, then foster care. But that's a whole other story. I built a new life. On my own terms. I learned to stop apologizing for who I was. I even became a stand-up comic for a while. Not professionally, but enough to pay rent in college. I don't regret cutting them off. Not for 1 second. But now they've found me. Somehow. After 20 years of silence. And 32 missed calls this morning? Yeah, something's coming. I just don't know what. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I'm ready to find out. I didn't pick up the phone that morning, or the next morning, or the one after that. I let the missed calls pile up, like unanswered voicemails from a past I'd buried deep enough to convince myself it no longer existed. But they didn't stop. Different numbers every day, all from the same area code, my hometown. The one I swore I'd never return to. For a while, I considered blocking every call that came from there, but something in me, curiosity, maybe, refused. I wanted to know what they wanted. Not because I cared, but because I knew it couldn't be good. And I was right. On the 4th day, an email came through. No subject line. Just a blank message with an attachment, a photo. I almost deleted it, but my thumb hovered. Then I opened it. It was a picture of me. Not recently. Not anything I'd posted online. No, this was old. Maybe 2 years after they abandoned me. I was 14, maybe 15, standing outside a coffee shop in the city. I had longer hair back then, wore a threadbare hoodie, and I was holding a chipped guitar case someone had given me at the shelter. My expression was tired, guarded. Someone had taken that photo without me knowing. I felt a cold pressure build behind my eyes. That's when it hit me. They'd been looking for me for a while. The next email came an hour later. This one had a subject line. We need to talk. It was from my mother. The email was short. No greeting. No apology. Just this. Jason, things have changed. It's time to come home. We're willing to forget the past. We'll explain everything when we see you. Please call us before it's too late. Mom. That was it. No warmth. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Forget the past. Like we'd had a minor disagreement. Like they hadn't left me behind a dumpster at 13 and vanished. But that wasn't the worst part. A week later, I got a letter. An actual letter. Mailed. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, sharp. My dad's. Jason, your mother and I have done a lot of thinking. We're not proud of everything. But you're a man now. And men don't hold grudges. We need you here. It's important. Mark agrees. He says you've had enough time to find yourself. You've made your point. Come home. Dad. There it was again. That same condescending tone. The same inability to acknowledge any wrongdoing without deflecting blame or minimizing it. And Mark, of course he was involved. The golden boy. I hadn't heard from him in 2 decades either, but apparently he was still loyal to their twisted little club. I wish I could say I laughed it off. That I threw the letter in the trash and moved on. But I didn't. I sat on my couch for hours, just staring at it, thinking about everything. The years I spent bouncing between foster homes. The first time I slept in a real bed again. The first job I worked under the table washing dishes just to eat. The people who helped me, strangers who owed me nothing, but gave more kindness than my own parents ever did. And I thought about the years they weren't there. When I graduated high school, alone. When I turned 18 and got my own apartment, alone. When I bombed my first open mic and walked 3 miles home in the rain, alone. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every nightmare, every small win, I did it without them. And now, suddenly, they wanted to talk? I ignored them. But that was the thing about my parents. They didn't like being ignored. They liked control. And when they didn't have it, they escalated. A week later, I got a knock on my door. I live in a small but quiet building in the city. The kind of place where the neighbors mostly keep to themselves, and packages occasionally go missing if you don't grab them fast enough. So a knock in the middle of the day wasn't that unusual, except no one ever visits me unannounced. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. It was Mark. Older, still clean-cut, wearing a blazer like he was coming from a meeting. He smiled like we'd just run into each other at a coffee shop. "Jason," he said. "Wow, look at you." I didn't say anything. He gave an awkward laugh and looked me up and down. "You look good. You filled out. You still doing the comedy thing?" I still didn't answer. He shifted uncomfortably, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Listen, I know this is a lot, but Mom and Dad, well, they want to talk. Really talk. They're not in the best shape. And they asked me to come find you. I figured I'd at least try." I looked down at the card. Real estate agent. Big brokerage. Of course. He was still the polished one. Still the favorite. Probably making 6 figures and being toasted at Thanksgiving dinners I never got invited to. "I don't want anything from them," I said finally. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that. "Look, I get it. What happened wasn't right. I told them that. I really did. But people change. They get older. They soften." I stared at him. "Do they?" He didn't answer. Just handed me the card and said, "If you change your mind, we'll be in town a few more days." Then he turned and walked away. I shut the door and threw the card in the trash. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something wasn't adding up. They didn't just want to apologize. There was something they wanted from me. Something they weren't saying. A few nights later, I finally broke down and Googled them. It took a little digging. Most of their online presence was vague or outdated. But eventually, I found a local news article from 2 years ago. My father had been named in a lawsuit. Apparently, his company, an auto parts supplier, had gone under after a major recall scandal. Millions in damages. The article mentioned that they were forced to sell their house to cover legal fees. There was even a line about my mother being hospitalized briefly for stress-related health concerns. Suddenly, things started clicking into place. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they needed something. I started keeping notes. Every call, every message, every time they tried to reach me, something told me this wasn't over, and I needed to be ready. The final straw came a few days later. I got a certified letter at work. My receptionist handed it to me with a puzzled look. "Family emergency?" she asked. I didn't answer. The letter was from a lawyer. Not mine. Theirs. It was a formal request, borderline demand, that I attend a family mediation session in person. The document was worded politely, but the intent was clear. They wanted something legally binding, and they were pushing hard to make it happen. That's when I realized how far they were willing to go. I hadn't seen these people in 20 years. I'd built a life without them, healed wounds they inflicted, grown into someone I could actually respect. And now, out of nowhere, they were trying to drag me back into their orbit, with lawyers, with guilt, with carefully crafted half-apologies. And the worst part? They still didn't think they did anything wrong. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at the legal notice, my heart racing. I thought about the dumpster behind that gas station, about the cold concrete, and the way my stomach growled while I cried myself to sleep, about the silence in the days that followed. That's when the rage came back. Not loud, not explosive, just quiet, simmering, focused. A sense of injustice that had been stewing for 20 years, finally reaching a boil. They wanted me back? Fine. I'd give them something to remember. But it wouldn't be forgiveness. And it definitely wouldn't be free. Rock bottom didn't look like what I thought it would. It wasn't a single moment or dramatic collapse. No thunderstorm. No broken bottle in a parking lot. It was quieter than that. Colder. It looked like me, sitting alone in my apartment at 2 in the morning, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand, and that letter from the lawyer in the other, trying to remember how I got here. I wasn't crying. I didn't scream or throw anything. I just sat there, numb, as the realization sank in. They hadn't changed. Not even a little. After 20 years, after all the time I spent wondering if maybe I had overreacted, if maybe I was the one being unfair, it turned out they were still the same people. Entitled, controlling, manipulative. The only difference now is desperation. And for some reason, that stung even more than the abandonment itself. I think part of me, some dusty little corner of my heart, had always hoped they'd reach out one day, not to guilt me, not to beg, but to apologize. To look me in the eye and admit what they did. To say, we were wrong. We failed you. You didn't deserve that. But that hope was gone now. And in its place was a hollow kind of clarity. I was never going to get that apology. Not from them. And if I wanted peace, I'd have to give it to myself. The next few weeks were rough. I won't lie and say I immediately became stronger, wiser, or more put together. That's not how healing works. I stopped sleeping, lost a few pounds, started skipping stand-up nights. Friends noticed something was off, but I brushed it off as stress from work. I stopped answering most texts. Not because I was trying to be dramatic. I just didn't have the energy. It felt like I was watching myself from a distance. Like someone had switched me to autopilot and forgotten the controls. The worst part? I started to believe them again. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe all the distance I'd put between us had twisted the story in my head, made me see villains where there were only flawed parents trying their best. Mark certainly seemed to think so. He'd sent a few follow-up texts after our surprise meeting, each one more measured and understanding than the last. He didn't push too hard, didn't guilt-trip directly, just gently reminded me that Mom's health isn't great, and Dad's not as strong as he used to be. It was subtle, calculated, almost like he'd read a guide on how to lure an estranged sibling back into the fold. And I almost bought it. Almost. Until one night, I pulled out an old shoebox from the back of my closet, the kind I hadn't touched in years. Inside were scattered pieces of my past, old photos, crumpled notebook pages, a few faded receipts. I kept it all for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Maybe to remind myself I existed before the hurt. Maybe to have proof that my story was real. I flipped through the photos first. Most of them were of me at the shelter. Smiling in some, blank-faced in others. I found one of me at 16, holding up my first paycheck. I was grinning like I'd just won the lottery. In a way, I had. And then I found a drawing. It was one I'd made in the youth shelter art program. A comic strip, actually, for panels. In the first, a little boy with wild hair tells a joke to his parents. They glare at him. In the second, he tells the same joke to a group of strangers. They laugh. In the third, the boy is older, standing on a stage. The crowd is bigger now, and the laughter louder. And in the fourth panel, he's alone backstage, smiling to himself. The caption read, "I made them laugh." That means I exist. I stared at that drawing for a long time. And then I got angry. But not the kind of anger that lashes out or breaks things. This was colder, focused. It was the kind of anger that says, no more. They had already taken enough from me. My childhood, my trust, my belief that love could exist without conditions. I wasn't about to give them the last thing I had, my dignity. So I started making changes. First, I rejoined the open mic circuit. I showed up to a dingy little club on 6th Street, got up on stage with trembling hands, and bombed harder than I had in years. My timing was off. My material was rusty. I even forgot a punchline halfway through. But when I walked off that stage, something shifted. I felt alive. Because for the first time in weeks, I'd done something that reminded me who I was. Not their son. Not Mark's little brother. Me. Jason. The kid who turned pain into punchlines. Who survived on scraps and sarcasm and still found a way to laugh. That kid was still in there. And he wasn't done. I started writing again. Every night. Not just jokes, stories, sketches, essays, whatever came out. I didn't care if it was good. I just needed to bleed onto the page. Some nights it hurt. Some nights it healed. Most nights it did both. I also started therapy again. I'd done it before, years ago, but stopped when I thought I'd moved on. Turns out healing isn't linear, and sometimes, old wounds reopen when you least expect it. My therapist, a calm, middle-aged woman named Elena, didn't flinch when I told her the whole story. The gas station, the dumpster, the letter. She just nodded and said, "That's a lot to carry." And somehow, hearing that made it feel lighter. I worked hard, quietly, over the next few months. I didn't post about it, didn't announce it to friends or seek validation. I just rebuilt, piece by piece. I got offered a spot in a local comedy showcase. Nothing huge, but enough to draw a crowd. I accepted. I reconnected with a friend I'd lost touch with, Maya, a fellow comic who had always believed in me more than I believed in myself. We started writing sketches together, eventually launching a small YouTube channel. It was scrappy, inconsistent, and wildly fun. One of our sketches even went viral. Not crazy viral, but enough that we got emails from local producers asking what else we had. And somewhere along the way, I started sleeping again. Deep, dreamless sleep. The kind I hadn't had in years. It wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had nightmares sometimes. Still woke up half expecting to see that lawyer's letter on my nightstand. But those moments became fewer, farther between. And when they came, I was ready. Because now, I had proof. Proof that I wasn't just a cast-off or a punchline in someone else's story. I was the whole damn setup. I even started mentoring kids at a local community center. Teens who were going through their own versions of hell. I didn't preach. I didn't pretend to have it all figured out. I just listened. Sometimes, that's all people need. To be heard. To know someone else made it out. Then, one night, I got a text. From Maya. "Hey, weird question. Do you still have your old voicemail greeting?" I laughed. I hadn't thought about that in years. I used to do impressions on my voicemail. One was a fake British butler. Another was a loud New Yorker. People used to leave their own jokes just to hear the next greeting. I checked my voicemail settings, just for fun. And that's when I saw it. 3 new messages. From the same number. The first one was from my dad. He sounded tired. "Jason, we saw the video. The one with the sketch. You always were good at that stuff. I just wanted to say we're still in town. If you want to talk." The second was from my mother. "Jason, honey, we miss you. We never should have left that night. We didn't think. We thought you'd follow. We didn't think it'd be forever." And the third? It was Mark. "Jay, you're killing it, man. I saw the video. You're really doing it, huh? Listen, Dad's not doing well. He won't say it, but we need help. Financial help. I know that's a lot to ask, but I figured I'd try." There it was. The ask. Not for forgiveness. Not for connection. For money. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, listening to those voicemails over and over, letting them sink in. They hadn't changed, but I had. And for the first time in my life, I realized something powerful. I didn't need their apology, because I had already won. I had built something from the ashes. Not just a career, not just stability, but a sense of self. Something they could never touch again. Something they couldn't take, no matter how many voicemails they left or letters they sent. But I also knew this wasn't over. They weren't going to go away quietly. They had made it clear they needed something. And they were willing to play every card they had left. But what they didn't know was that I had a few cards of my own. And this time, I wasn't playing nice. Revenge isn't about rage. Not real revenge. Not the kind that lingers. The kind that leaves a mark so clean it almost looks like justice. It's not loud or violent. It's not about shouting into phones or showing up uninvited. It's not even about getting even. It's about clarity, purpose, precision, and maybe, if you do it right, it's about closure. I didn't want to ruin their lives. I wanted them to see what they lost. But before I could do that, I had to understand the game they were playing, and more importantly, what they were hiding. Because make no mistake, they weren't reaching out of love. They were playing a long game, and I needed to get ahead of it. The first thing I did was call Maya. I hadn't told her the full story before. She knew bits and pieces about my childhood, the gas station, the rough years after, but never the whole thing. We were sitting on her rooftop when I finally let it all out. The missed calls, the emails, the certified letters, the voicemails. Everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer advice. She just listened. When I finished, she looked at me with this strange mix of sympathy and steel in her eyes. "So," she said, "what do you want to do?" I looked at her. "I want to know what they want. Really. And I want to make sure whatever it is they don't get it." She smiled. "Then let's find out." We made a plan that night. Step 1. Gather intel. I started with Mark. I hadn't responded to any of his messages since that first encounter, but I still had his number. So I texted him. Short, vague, but enough to open the door. Hey, I've been thinking. Maybe we should talk. He replied within minutes. Absolutely. We're still in town. Let's grab dinner. Just us. No pressure. No pressure. Right. We met at a restaurant downtown. Not fancy, but not cheap either. He showed up in a crisp button-down and loafers like he'd just stepped out of a real estate brochure. I wore jeans and a hoodie. Let him feel off balance. He hugged me when he saw me. I didn't hug back. We sat down, ordered drinks, and made small talk. I let him lead. He asked about my work, complimented the sketches, acted impressed. I nodded, smiled, kept my voice light. Then, after the appetizers, I finally said, "So what's going on? Why now?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into his drink. Finally, he said, "Dad's in trouble. Financially. Mom too." I tilted my head. I figured. He leaned in. "It's bad, Jay. You know about the lawsuit." I read the article. Well, what they didn't publish was what came after. The house is gone. Dad's retirement? Gone. They're renting a place now. Small. Cheap. And the debts are catching up. I stayed quiet. They were planning to declare bankruptcy. Still might. But then he paused. Then Mom remembered something. I raised an eyebrow. What? He hesitated. The deed. My stomach turned. What deed? He looked at me carefully, as if measuring how much to say. When you were born, he said slowly, Grandpa left some property in your name. A plot of land. Remote, up in the hills. Worth nothing back then, but now? It's prime real estate. Developers have been calling for years. Dad always brushed them off. But now, I blinked. You're telling me they've been sitting on land that belongs to me for 20 years. He gave a sheepish shrug. Technically. But the thing is, your name's still on it. And they can't sell without your consent. There it was. The real reason they'd come crawling back. Not guilt. Not regret. A deed. A forgotten gift from a dead man they barely talk about. And now that they were broke, they wanted to cash it in. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "And you thought I'd just sign it over?" He smiled carefully. "We were hoping you'd want to help the family." I leaned back. "Mark, they abandoned me at a gas station." He flinched. "They thought you'd come back. They were trying to teach you a lesson." I stared at him. "They left me to sleep behind a dumpster." He looked down. "I know. And I'm sorry. I really am. But can't we move forward? Forget the past." There it was again. That same line. Forget the past. No, I wouldn't forget it. I'd use it. I ended the dinner shortly after that. Told him I'd think about it. He thanked me like I'd already said yes. Then I went home and started planning. I contacted a lawyer the next day, someone I trusted, someone who'd worked with creatives before and knew how to keep things quiet. Her name was Tara, and she didn't blink when I told her the story. "They're bluffing," she said after reviewing the situation. "They can't do anything without your signature. You hold all the cards." I nodded. "Good. Let's make sure it stays that way." Over the next few weeks, Tara helped me pull every public document tied to that land. Tax records, deed history, sale inquiries. Turns out a few developers had made offers over the years. Some were laughably low, but one, about 2 years ago, was serious. High six figures. And it had gone unanswered. I told Tara to get back in touch with that developer. Quietly. Meanwhile, I needed to deal with my parents. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. They'd push harder. Use every tool they had. Emotional manipulation, guilt, even public sympathy. So I beat them to it. I called Meyer again. "I need a favor," I said. "A big one." She grinned. "What kind?" "We're going to do a show. One night only. And we're going to tell the story. The real one." Her eyes lit up. We spent the next month preparing. I wrote new material, some funny, some raw. Not a sob story, not a pity play. Just honest. My story start to finish. The gas station. The years on the street. The slow climb. The sudden calls. I didn't name names, didn't rant or accuse. I let the truth do the work. We booked a local theater, small, intimate, packed house. Filmed the whole thing. Uploaded it to our channel with the title, The Night They Left Me. A story about family, failure, and freedom. It blew up. Not viral overnight viral, but steady, meaningful traction. Comments poured in. People shared their own stories. Others reached out with support. Even a few reporters contacted me for interviews. I turned them down. This wasn't about fame. It was about truth. I knew it would reach them eventually. And it did. 3 days later, I got a text from my mother. "How could you do this to us? You're twisting everything. You're making us look like monsters." No apology. Just outrage. I didn't reply. The next day, a letter arrived. Handwritten. My dad. If you want to destroy what's left of this family, fine. But don't come crying when you regret it. Still no apology. Still no ownership. And then, 2 days later, a voicemail from Mark. I tried to help. I really did. But you've made your choice. Just know this. You're not the only one Grandpa cared about. And you're not the only one he left something to. That caught my attention. I replayed it. Again and again. Then I called Tara. Can you check if Grandpa left anything to Mark? She called back 2 hours later. He didn't, she said. But your father did something shady. Transferred part of another property into Mark's name a few years ago, probably trying to secure something before the bankruptcy hit. It's not illegal, but it's sneaky. So they were already preparing for this. They knew I'd say no. They just didn't expect me to go public. Now, I had 2 options. I could walk away, keep the land, sell it quietly, disappear again, or I could go one step further, make them feel what I felt, make them watch what they lost. And I had just the plan for that. But first, I needed one more thing, something they valued more than money, their reputation. They always wanted to be seen a certain way. Grant and Sheila Archer, pillars of the community, church-going, God-fearing, hard-working, pull yourself up by the bootstraps Americans. The kind of people who smiled for Christmas cards and hosted barbecues in the summer. The kind of couple who nodded solemnly when people said things like, family comes first. The kind who showed up to charity drives and clapped loudly at small-town parades. But the truth was always uglier than the lawn signs and forced smiles. And I had finally reached the point where I wasn't going to let them hide anymore. The final piece fell into place when Tara got back in touch with the developers. Jason, she said over the phone, they're serious. They're ready to make an offer. Higher than before. Mid-7 figures. My throat tightened. I was sitting in my apartment, staring out the window as she spoke. The land, my land, was no longer a dusty afterthought in the hills. A highway expansion and a new commercial zoning approval had turned it into a gold mine. I hadn't expected that kind of money, but I didn't flinch. Move forward, I told her. Get the paperwork ready. Quietly. She hesitated. Do you want to tell them before the sale? I smiled. Not yet. Because the truth was, the money wasn't the revenge. The silence was. The revenge was letting them hear about it after it happened. Not from me. From someone else. A whisper, a headline, a painful rumor confirmed with a few keystrokes. The realization that everything they'd schemed for, the reason they'd crawled back into my life, it was already gone. I just had one thing left to do. The fundraiser. That had been Maya's idea. A final performance. A comedy special, yes, but also a benefit. For kids like me, runaways, foster kids, teens abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect them. We called it Left Behind, a night for the forgotten. We rented out a bigger venue this time. Over 200 seats. Sold out in 3 days. Word of mouth helped, but so did the original video. It had hit over 600,000 views by then. People were invested. They wanted to hear the rest of the story. And this time, I was ready to give it to them. But not as a victim. As a survivor. The night of the fundraiser, I stood backstage, heart hammering like it always did. Maya squeezed my shoulder. You got this. I nodded. And then I stepped out into the light. I started with jokes. Light ones. About family. Growing up. The weirdness of childhood. Got them laughing early. Warmed them up. Then I pivoted. Told them about the gas station. About the grape soda. About the dumpster. You could hear a pin drop. And then I told them about the comeback. About the art classes at the shelter. The stand-up gigs. The near eviction. The couch surfing. The people who showed up for me when no one else did. I didn't name my parents. But they knew. The crowd knew. The story had gone far enough that most people had pieced it together. Especially the local ones. I ended the set with a line I'd practiced 100 times in the mirror. Sometimes, when people say family comes first, what they really mean is, family comes first, until you disappoint them. Pause. But the thing about being left behind is, you learn to build something better without them. Applause erupted. Long, loud. Sustained. Backstage, I wiped my face and tried to steady my breathing. Maya hugged me. Tara texted me just 3 words. Deal is done. And then we launched the fundraiser. Donations poured in. Small ones. Big ones. Anonymous ones. Enough to fully fund 3 programs for runaways in the city. Enough to provide housing, food, and therapy for kids who had no one else. Enough to change lives. But it was what happened the next morning that sealed it. I woke up to dozens of texts, screenshots, links, Facebook posts, local news headlines. Comedian raises $500,000 for at-risk youth. Sells inherited land for $2.4 million. The article went into detail. Too much detail. My name, the land, the value, the sale. They even included a quote from Tara, who'd spoken vaguely about the significance of the land and how I decided to invest in healing, not revenge. I laughed out loud at that one. Because, of course, that was the revenge. I didn't return their calls. But I know what happened next. It started small. People in their church asking questions. Old neighbors whispering. Someone mentioning the video. Then the articles. Then the fundraiser. Then the photo of me holding the donation check, smiling with Maya and the kids from the shelter. And then the fallout. I heard from a mutual contact, someone who used to know my parents, back when I was a kid, that they were furious. Not heartbroken. Not remorseful. Furious. Because I'd done it without them. Because I'd succeeded. Because I didn't play the role they wanted. The lost son come crawling back. The prodigal child willing to trade forgiveness for a scrap of family dinner and a signature on a dotted line. Instead, I built a stage and let the whole world see what they tried to bury. A week later, I got one final letter. Typed. Formal. From a different lawyer. It was a cease and desist. They accused me of defamation. Said I was painting them in a false light. Demanded I take down the video, the show, the fundraiser page. I forwarded it to Tara. She wrote back in under 10 minutes. They don't have a case. And if they try, I'll bury them in paperwork. Enjoy your week. I didn't reply to the lawyer, but I did write something. To them. A letter. Short. To the point. Grant and Sheila, I received your lawyer's notice. You are free to pursue whatever action you believe will bring you peace. I found mine. Jason. I never heard back. Not from them. Not from Mark. Not from anyone in their orbit. The silence was beautiful. Not because it meant they were gone, but because it meant they finally understood. They had no more power. I used to think revenge was about destruction. That you had to become cruel to beat cruelty. That you had to burn something down. But I didn't burn anything. I built something better. I told the truth. I healed. I gave back. And I let them destroy themselves with their own expectations. The last time I checked their names online, I found a post on a local forum. Someone had asked why they didn't show up to the community fair this year. One of the replies said, they're laying low. That son of theirs aired some dirty laundry and made it big. The next reply? Good. About time someone did. I clicked away and shut my laptop. The past had finally been archived. And for the first time in my life, I felt weightless. Not because they were gone, but because I was free. And I didn't have to laugh to prove I existed anymore.